Hello friends, this is Worm, and I was browsing Twitter today looking for topics to discuss in Destiny 2, and I came across everyone's favorite Saltagreppo posting about some of his balancing ideas. Now, I want to precursor this video by saying, I am aware that many people don't like Saltagreppo, they don't like his ideas, blah, blah, blah. They say he's too hardcore, he's too this, that, and the other. Listen, I get the sentiment. I do share the sentiment. And with some of his ideas, yes, I would agree that they're extreme and they're kind of silly sounding. But at the end of the day, he does have some very good opinions on game balances. I mean, look at Divinity. And I know, lots of people were mad about Divinity being nerfed and stuff like that. And, I guess you do you, boo-boo, right? But Divinity was something that needed to be nerfed. Like literally, it needed to be nerfed. He talked about nerfing Well of Radiance as well at some point, and Bungie announced that they're going to be nerfing Well of Radiance. Like, Well of Radiance does need to be nerfed. Like, as a Warlock player, not a Warlock main, but as a Warlock player, it's frustrating that I feel like I have to play Well of Radiance. Like, if I don't play Well of Radiance, I am putting my team in a bad predicament or whatever. So I know a lot of people don't like his ideas, but I'm going to go in here. I'm going to read this. We're going to be unbiased. We're going to look at it from an analytical standpoint. We're going to pretend it's not even Saltagreppo. We're going to pretend this is some random person on the internet that's talking about these changes here. And I haven't really read through them. I just kind of found this, and there's a bunch. So we're going to go over, we're going to read each one. We're going to analytically look at it and think about it and talk about whether or not it is a good idea. Starting off with the first one here, Saltagreppo says he wants to extend the exotic primaries red bar buffs to all legendaries and give every primary, aside from hand cannons, odd choice that he didn't want to do hand cannons, but we'll see if it goes anywhere, and give every primary a 25% buff to majors and bosses. Leave out some top tier exotics like Revision 0. 0 should be spelled out 0, not the actual number 0. But anyways, Outbreak, etc. He misspelled etc. I'm sorry. I went to school for English, okay? The goal is to not have primaries feeling useless when hitting anything that's not a red bar. If some exotic primaries feel underwhelming compared to their legendary counterparts, buff their exotic traits. An interesting concept. We'll talk about that in a second. Exotics should feel strong due to their specialties anyways, not due to an arbitrary 40% buff. So basically what he's saying here is he wants all primary ammo weapons except for hand cannons to be stronger against majors and bosses particularly. This is interesting. He wants all exotic primaries to have their, all exotic primaries or the red bar buff. So for those of y'all who may not be aware, don't know what we're talking about, exotic primary weapons that get a 40% damage boost against anything with a red bar. So those dregs, those knights, those captains, if it has a red bar on its name, the exotic primary ammo weapon will do 40% more damage to it. Now he wants to extend that to legendary primaries as well. And he wants to buff exotic primary perks so that they feel better. So one of the things, I will say this, okay, one of the reasons why Bungie added this exotic buff, this 40% damage buff to exotic primary weapons is because at one point exotic primary weapons were not used. Like, everybody's using exotic heavies or exotic special weapons, and Bungie wanted to give players a way to feel like this was I guess okay to use an exotic primary instead of a legendary primary ammo weapon, and this is what they did. Now I do also think that, I'll be honest, I think Salt is kind of on the right direction here. As a player, like, let's use Quicksilver Storm. I love Quicksilver Storm. It feels incredible. It cuts down enemies, but it's because it does 40% more damage to them. Like Rufus's Fury, same archetype, same damage type. I like Rufus's Fury, but Quicksilver Storm overshadows Rufus's in every single way. And granted, like, yes, the exotic perk, we'll talk about the exotic perk here in just a second, but in like Onslaught, why would I use an exotic primary or a legendary primary? Because they don't deal comparable damage to exotic primaries. That's what I'm trying to say. The legendary primary weapons, like, it feels, especially once you get in those higher rounds, and especially in the legend version of onslaught, you can really feel their damage drop off. I mean, like hand cannons, for example, which he said aside from hand cannons, and this is what I'm confused about. You know, aside from hand cannons, give everything a buff. Legendary hand cannons should be able to one-shot red bars, like dregs and thralls. And, you know, in onslaught, just as an example, when you climb up into those higher tiers or that higher difficulty, like legend or something, you lose the ability to one-shot red bars with a hand cannon. That I don't really like. Like, I think that this change is actually a pretty decent idea. Although, to be fair, I think that there's some exotics that, you know, no matter how much you buff their you know, exotic perk, their exoticness, they're just never going to be used. You know, take something like Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo is not used because it's 40% more damage. It's used because of its melee buff, right? It's perfect for melee builds, and that's why people use it. Okay, take something like Last Word. Nobody uses Last Word inside of PvE. You could make its exotic perk better. Oh, well, now it's guaranteed to hit crits when firing from the hip. Nobody's going to use it. Right. And granted, that's a problem with the perk itself. Like, you know, not that it's like needs a damage buff or anything like that. But, you know, I kind of agree with this. I really am curious to know why he said aside from hand cannons. I think that, I mean, if you just give every legendary weapon a buff, that 40% buff to all red bars, that a 25% buff to majors and bosses, or I'm sorry, give exotic primaries, and maybe that's what could keep exotic primaries like feeling different, so to speak, is the difference, you know, between, hey, like I have an exotic, or I have a legendary primary, I'm using it against a major, an orange bar knight is not dealing as much damage, but exotic primaries are. So way it would work, basically every weapon in the game, except according to Saul, and here's where I'm going to change it. I think every weapon should just get a 40% damage boost against red bars. That way they all feel strong. Like, red bars are supposed to be the feeder enemies, so to speak, like the feeder ads, right? You kill them easily. It should not take 2 or even 3 shots from a hand cannon to kill a vandal, for example. Now, like a captain, different story. Maybe a shielded knight, different story. Like those are the like supreme end of the red bar, right? But red bars, you know, I think that they should be easily killed. And I think obviously leaving out some of the strong options, like Revision Zero's sniper option, that just makes sense. Like if you buff Revision Zero's sniper to be even stronger, like it's gonna be incredible. Outbreak, maybe just reducing the damage that Outbreak does whenever it stacks on you know, an enemy target. But this one right here, I kind of like the idea of this. Let's move on to the second one though. Okay, so it says, he says, revert the change where chunks of ability energy, momentum transfer, demolitionist, etc., get scaled down, based on the base cooldown of the ability they go to, at least in PvE. Aside from being extremely counterintuitive, both for new and veteran players, all it ended up doing was hard nerfing builds that were already struggling. While it did nothing to meta stuff like Sunbracers, Banner of War Titan, Bonkhammer, or Assassin's Cow Solar / Arc Hunter, because their core abilities have infinite uses by default. It also rarely ends up making sense in PvE because ability cooldowns are often balanced around PvP. For example, Fusion Grenade, the best PvE solar grenade for Warlocks, has lowest cooldown. I'm not sure what he meant by this last one here, but okay, I see where he's going with this one. Obviously, I of course I want to agree with this. You know, I want more abilities. But I think that he does have a good point here. Like he's saying that the strongest stuff, like the strongest, like most meta stuff, you know, Sunbracers, Banner War Titan, their abilities have constant uptime even after the nerfs. And then builds like maybe maybe a Stasis Titan, for example. Stasis Titan using, you know, the crystal walls and the glacier grenades, stuff like that. Those are struggling because now those have even less uptime, while the strongest stuff is still strong. I actually would agree with this. Like I think Bungie does need to revert this ability energy change. It doesn't feel, like he said, it doesn't feel intuitive at all. And I actually agree with this 100%. Like Banner War Titan, I use Banner War Titan all the time. It's incredibly strong. I have constant uptime on basically every single ability. I have the ability to nuke everything like in a room, like especially at Banner of War ×4, you know, you got tractor cannon, you got a 1-2 punch shotgun, you got syntheseps, everything like that working together. Like you can absolutely destroy everything, and you don't suffer at all because you get your abilities back just so quickly. Same thing with Sunbracer, same thing with you know, Bonk Hammer, which granted, Bonk Hammer is a little bit different because Bonk Hammer is like, you know, it's built into the subclass. It's not based around, you know, any mods or anything like that. Like Banner of War Titan, just Banner of War alone, not super strong, but once you start pairing it with that other stuff, you know, tractor cannon, 1-2 punch, synthesis, so that's where its power comes from. Sunbracers, again, this one, it's built into the subclass. You know, you throw a solar grenade, it's burnings, or I'm sorry, you use your melee, it's burning stuff. If you have on heat rises and you're in the air, you're getting melee ability energy back when you're getting kills against scorched targets, and solar grenades are scorching everything, and you're throwing a million solar grenades, blah blah. Like, it's kind of all built into the subclass. So yeah, I think that reverting these changes would be beneficial. I mean, really, if you wanted to, if Bungie is concerned about ability usage, they should nerf things that are built into the subclass, such as Sunbracers, Banner of War, you know, Bonk, or not Banner of War, but like Sunbracers and Bonk, where they're built into the subclass to have basically infinite uptime. Nerf those abilities, like nerf, you know, momentum transfer and demolition is when using those specific abilities, like somehow, some way. I'm not a developer, so I don't want to sit here and say do this, 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 and this, but I think that would be a better option to do. But yeah, I think overall, I think this is a decent change. Okay, so here we go. The nerf to arm/class item mods like impact induction, bomber can stay. They were overtuned compared to other armor mods, and reverting this change as mentioned above will do enough to make them feel good again. The nerf to our armor mods can stay. I don't really know why. I mean, I don't know. This kind of ties into this one, I guess. These two kind of tie in together. I don't really see a point in this. Like, they were overtuned compared to other armor mods, and reverting the change mentioned above will do enough to make them feel good again. I don't know. I'd say just unnerf everything. Okay, momentum transfer, impact induction, bomber. Just unnerf it all. Unnerf it all. I don't agree with this one. I say unnerf it all. Okay, moving on to the next one. Rebalance sources of damage resistance. Ooh, especially passive ones. The goal of this is to make the damage you take feel more intuitive or predictable, increase build variety, and reduce the need for the devs to come up with cheese or one-shots to kill players. It's also a good occasion to do this. It's also a good occasion to do this since GMs will be going from -25 to -20 cap. While the difficulty of some old content will slightly vary / increase due to this, that's not the intention. It's just an inevitable side effect of a balanced patch in a live service game, and I am in favor of changes to mitigate that if possible. He said, if possible. I truly think having more consistent damage intakes could severely improve. I think he meant to say substantially improve the game in the long term, especially for new players. Most people do not use full meta builds with high damage resistance and don't utilize it properly. So if the game won't balance around it anymore, they would be able to use various builds without being at a strong disadvantage. Okay, so to break this down just real quick, and I think actually I saw values. Okay, yeah, let's go over these values he said here. Resilience. He wants to nerf resilience from 30% down to 15%. Nerf woven mail from 40% damage resistance down to 25%. Whisper chain, same thing, 40 to 25. Void overshield goes up from 50 to 70. Interesting. Okay, but it says void overshield should be the best defensive tool, but it's the weakest one. It needs a big buff. I would hard agree with this one. I would hard agree with this one. We'll talk about these others in a second. Well of Radiance from 50-ish% to 15, maybe 25% for the person that actually puts the well down. Sever bosses should go from 4 or okay, hold on. Sever, currently the way it is, bosses deal, or enemies that deal 40% less damage. So he says bosses should only deal 25% less damage. So bosses should still do, so basically this is a nerf to Sever, saying bosses should do more damage when they are severed. And then overload, same thing. So damage should only be reduced by 10% from bosses. Okay, let me say this. I see where he's coming from. Okay, I do. I see the vision. I see what he's going for. Basically, he wants to see less cheesy stuff happen. Less cheese in terms of, less gameplay decisions by the developers to say, hey, you know what? We need a white mechanic because this vandal, this sniper vandal, this sniper scion needs to be able to one-shot guardians. Okay, he wants less of those. But in order to do that, he feels like we would need to rebalance damage resistance so that guardians overall have less damage resistance, but with less damage resistance, even if you're building into it, it would push players into newer builds. And especially new players, they don't focus on damage resistance as stuff as much as they do, their just fun stuff in their build, their ability usage and stuff like that. Again, I see where he's coming from with these numbers here. I mean, this is it's really tough to justify these numbers. I mean, resilience, especially when it went from 40 down to 30, like it's still like you feel tanky, but you don't feel like invincible. And I think, what was it before, guys? I think it was like 10%? Like I think resilience like 1 through 10 was like 10, might have gone up to 15%. So basically just revert resilience back to the way it was. I don't think that this is necessarily a good idea. And it's the same principle that we have with the whole hunter situation and their class ability. When class abilities are tied to your class stat, that is problematic. Okay, this is why hunters have such a big issue in PvE, because hunters, of course, in PvE, you need to be focusing on resilience, then recovery, then mobility. Mobility is kind of pointless inside of PvE. But hunters have to do it to get their class ability and to get utilization out of their class ability. So I think that doing this, I don't really like the idea of reducing resilience. Like, I think that resilience is fine where it is. In terms of Woven Mail and Whisper of Chains on stasis, like these two I can get behind a little bit more. Like Woven Mail giving you an additional 40% damage resistance that you can stack even further with other stuff. It's ridiculous. I mean, Banner of War Titan is a prime example of this. Like Banner of War Titan, for those of y'all who don't play Titan or who have not seen or felt Banner of War Titan in full effect, Banner of War Titan, I think, my opinion, is possibly the strongest PvE subclass we have ever had. I mean, its damage output is insane. Its damage resistance is insane. Like, you literally feel invincible. I feel, when I use Banner of War Titan, my Synthoceps Banner of War build, I feel stronger than I did even with, like, a pre-nerf Lorelei Splendor. Okay, and pre-nerf Lorelei Splendor, pre-restoration nerf is what I should say. Pre-restoration nerf Lorelei Splendor was insane. Like, you could literally stand there, you would have your shields broken, it would pop that sunspot, take you back to full health. By the time your sunspot ran out, and you would have your class ability back, and it would just break again, and you could literally stand there invincible. I feel like Banner of War Titan is stronger now than even Lorelei Splendor was. So again, Woven Mail, definitely can see, especially because of how easy Woven Mail is to activate. Whisper of Chains, actually, I changed my mind. I think Whisper of Chains, this would be too much, and I'll explain in just a second, but Woven Mail is so easy to activate. Pick up Orb of Power, utilize Into the Fray. There's a lot of different ways you can get Woven Mail. And so I think that reducing that damage resistance would probably be fine. Down to 25%, I think that sounds like it would be, I think that'd be fine. Again, you would still be strong. Like, you'd still be able to tank a lot of damage, but it wouldn't be making you literally almost invincible like it does now. And don't get me wrong, I love playing invincibly on my Titan. But again, for the long-term health of the game, we've got to look at it, it's so strong. It does need a nerf. But moving on to Whisper of Chains here. This one's different because Whisper of Chains states when you're standing near a stasis crystal or a frozen enemy, you get damage resistance. The difference between these two, okay, is you have to, like, you're less in charge of where these things are. Like, unless you have like a Touch of Winter grenade on Hunter or you have a Glacier grenade, you don't get to just choose where your stasis crystals are, right? Like, Headstone will proc where you killed the enemy. Depending on what it is, like, you know, if you're playing on Warlock, you don't get stasis crystal, you freeze enemies, you know, and so you don't get a choice of where these enemies are frozen. You don't get a choice in how long they stay frozen for. Like once they're shattered, they're unfrozen and stuff. So this one I think is fine at 40%. And actually I feel like that would add into the whole stasis effect. I wouldn't change Whisper of Change just because of how situational it is, how difficult it might be to actually have, you know, have that, take full advantage of it. Void Overshield, definitely agree. Void Overshield needs a major buff. I think the actual Void Overshield itself needs more HP too. I think currently it's 50 HP. I think it should be 100 HP. Also, I think increasing its damage resistance would be a huge deal. I think the reason why Bungie hasn't done this so far is because it is pretty easy to get void overshields. Like it's incredibly easy to get void overshields if we're being honest with each other. You know, Bastion Titans can get it back very quickly, you know, especially paired with some of the class abilities and stuff. You have Echo of Vigilance that can get it literally when your shield is broken and you get a kill. Like it's very easy to get void overshields. I think that's the reason why Bungie hasn't done it so far. But at the same time, void overshield to me is like, that is the defensive thing. Like whenever I think of, oh, like what's a good defensive subclass, like I think of Well of Radiance or Void Titan because of Bastion. And so I would agree with this. I think this would be a really strong change, as well as increasing the HP that overshield has. Maybe not to 100, but more than 50. I'd say like maybe 70, or not 75, maybe increase it to like, or yeah, 75 HP. Maybe increase like 75 HP or something like that. But yeah, I think this needs a buff. Well of Radiance, this is something I've talked about in videos before. I do think that when Well is nerfed, and we know it's getting nerfed at some point in the final shape, when Well of Radiance gets nerfed, they're either going to nerf one of two things. They're either going to nerf the damage resistance that you're going to have inside the well, or they're going to nerf the damage from inside of the well. Give me just 1 second. I'm getting a phone call. Now, where were we? Sorry. But Well of Radiance getting nerfed, they're either going to nerf the damage resistance you have inside the well, or they're going to nerf the damage output that you deal from inside of the well. I have always been one to think that, you know, the Well of Radiance should be nerfed in terms of its damage output. You know, instead of dealing 25% more damage, leave the damage output to the bubble. You put a bubble down, you're invincible while you're inside the bubble, but you can't shoot out of it. You know, you have to step out to get, you know, weapons of light and whatnot. But the Well of Radiance, you can stand inside of, you get constant healing, and you can shoot out of it. But we know that nerf is coming. Now he says go from 50% damage resistance down to 25% damage resistance, or 15. I think this would be I think this probably would work. I wouldn't say 15 to 25. I'd say like 30% damage resistance, go down to 30%. You know, that way you don't get nuked, because there is sometimes, you know, sometimes when you just get obliterated in the well, like enemies do huge damage. There's a boss attack, for example, that will like wipe you basically inside of the well if there was any lower damage resistance. But I do think that at the same time, like I shouldn't just be able to run into a group of enemies, like an onslaught, for example, put a well down and be invincible while standing inside of it, while I'm just shooting at the boss and everything else around me is laying into me, and I'm just healing. I've got this massive amount of damage resistance. Like, you know, I think that's reducing the damage resistance by a little bit, not all the way down to 15%. I think maybe 25% for everybody, but I think 30 would be more optimal. Again, so you're not getting obliterated, but also you're not just invincible one side of it. As for the sever buff on bosses, and the overload nerf on buff, I guess you'd be buffing the bosses, but you'd be nerfing guardians. I think these are fine. I mean, really, this, in my opinion, the main thing about this is bosses are bosses for a reason. Bosses should have powerful attacks. Bosses should have powerful stomp mechanics. Like, you know, and really, you shouldn't be able to circumvent stomp mechanics unless you are building into it. You know, like, for example, a Titan using Stronghold, just as an example. But yeah, I mean, overall, this is a really, really hot take. This is a hot opinion, but I do think that his idea behind this is a good one. This would, you know, reduce the amount of just cheesy stuff we have, you know, so it's not just like, oh, well, we have to stay all the way back during this Grandmaster Nightfall, otherwise we just get one shot by all the snipers in the room or something like that. You know, allow players to move up, move around the arena and stuff like that. Because I think also, like, again, when you're nerfing players' resilience, you're also nerfing the enemies as well, right? Like, he's not saying just nerf resilience, keep everything the same. He's also bringing up nerfing enemies, you know, enemies attacks and stuff like that. So it would kind of balance out in the end, like, you know, like, yeah, now instead of, you know, taking 30% less damage, we only take 15% less damage, but also these snipers, for example, do 30% less damage. So we're still not getting one shot by them. I see the vision here. I like these. I like some of these ideas. I think resilience is fine. I think that Whisper of Chains, I think resilience is fine where it is. 30% is fine. I think Whisper of Chains doesn't need to change. I think Void Overshield should be buffed. But yeah, overall, again, this one's a difficult one to talk about, but I think that his idea behind it is probably pretty good. And I think Bungie should take note on his opinion here, you know, in terms of maybe not the specific numbers, because I think most of these numbers I don't really like, but I think Bungie should listen to him in terms of, you know, Guardian resilience should not be something that players have to build so heavily into. Also, just a side note, resilience, of course, tier 10 caps out at 30%. I think that resilience should be tiered more linear. That's something that they said they want to do in the past, but like if I have tier 2 or tier 4, like if I have tier 2 resilience, I have like 6% damage resistance, but if I have tier 9 resilience, I have 24% damage resistance, and then tier 10 gets me 30. I think it should just be a linear, you know, at tier 1 you have 3%, tier 2 you have 6, tier 3 you have 9, so all the way up to 30. But let's move on to the next one here. Rework super regeneration. Oh, this could be interesting. So Salt says, I never liked super regen being moved from kills to damage, but if it has to stay that way, rebalance the way you acquire it. For some sources, some sources end up giving you 10 times the amount of other for no particular reason. Yep, this is something that we actually just noticed the other day in our build video with Tommy's Matchbook. Tommy's Matchbook gives you a ton of super energy as you're damaging enemies. Like, it gives you a ridiculous amount of super energy while you're damaging enemies because it has that scorch. It deals double damage. Like, it's fantastic. A warlock should not be able to place a well of radiance for DPS and have 70% of it back by the end of the phase just by hitting the boss with a fusion rifle. At least not without Phoenix Protocol. Part of the reason why roaming supers kind of suck, when they end, you have no super energy from them. Yeah, actually, this right here. This is, I agree with this. I do agree with this. Like as a, you know, when I'm playing Warlock, I think it's insane that Warlock literally can chain wells. Even without Phoenix Protocol, like, you can chain wells back to back. Like, especially if you have 2 Warlocks using Well of Radiance, you don't need Phoenix Protocol. You can use whatever you want, and you will have those Well of Radiances back because you can just lay into the boss, and dealing damage will give you super energy back. And it kind of makes Phoenix Protocol, I mean, Phoenix Protocol is an ease of use thing. Like, if you have it on, it's going to make it easier to get that super back, but at the same time, it's not necessary. I would kind of agree with this. Let's see here. That's an example. We'll go over that in just a second. But this is also, you know, he says this is why roaming supers do suck. Yeah, this is 100% why roaming supers suck, because you use a roaming super, you get, you know, a couple of kills with it. You're putting yourself at risk because you're having to go up into the fight and stuff, you know, and then it runs out, blah, blah, blah. But you also, I mean, your super energy is gone unless you're using some exotic that is specifically designed to give you more super energy back when your super ends. Yeah, I do agree with this. I do agree with this right here. Back in Destiny 1, it was heavily reliant on kills. And we just did a video earlier this week talking about bad juju and how bad juju kind of sucks. And why bad juju, like what we could do to change bad juju to make it better. But part of that could be nerfing super regeneration so that instead of being so reliant on getting just damage outs, it's doing other things on the battlefield. You know, perhaps getting kills is where you get the primary amount of your super energy. You know, higher tier enemies like majors, mini bosses give you more super energy per kill. Buffing your allies, giving them woven mail, restoration, radiant, stuff like that also gives you chunks of super energy so that it encourages more of a play, like more play style, not just, hey, put a well down, damage the boss. Like, cause that's kind of that's boring. Quite frankly, that is very boring. But if you change it so that, okay, now like, yeah, like you can get energy back from damaging the boss, but like at most you get 20% of your super back while you're damaging the boss inside of the well. I think that would be more optimal. But if you're inside the well and you're getting kills, like, oh, I'm just, I'm killing all the ads, y'all just deal damage to the boss, I'll kill all the ads, then you get 70-80% of your super back, because all you've been doing is getting kills, and you've been healing your allies. During a raid where not everybody's all grouped up, if you have to have people separated, you could throw healing grenades at them, and hitting somebody with a healing grenade gives you 10% super energy or something like that. Like, I think that actually would be more beneficial towards the game, because like we said, like, yes, like this technically, I guess, would be nerfing like Well of Radiance, unless you're using Phoenix Protocol, then you'd be fine. But at the same time, I think it would encourage more of a fun play style. Like, I put a well down, I'll be ad clear. That way I can get the Well of Radiance back. Okay. And so, yeah, I do agree with that. Now down here, he says, as an example, Thread of Generation on Strand worked the same way and had the same issue when you had where you had infinite grenades. I would suggest a similar solution. So, sorry, Thread of Generation. I was thinking about it for a second. Thread of Generation, dealing damage grants grenade energy. Yeah, I mean, literally pre-nerf, you could use like a 720 auto rifle, and just dealing damage would give you a grenade back. You'd have a grenade back so fast. But if you use like a hand cannon that deals very little damage, you wouldn't get it back as fast, because you're not, you're not dealing as much damage. But yeah, we're gonna go on to the next one here. Do something for Banner of War Titan. Do something for it, or do something to it. The changes above to Woven and Sever are already enough to nerf it. Yes, I would agree. But the max damage achievable should not be as high as it is. In my opinion, if you use grapple melee after grappling to a grapple point and you hit something, it should consume half of your grenade. If you only grapple for the movement, you can keep the full cooldown. This would fix the infinite spam while keeping the class still very strong. If it's too strong after, we can think of something else, but in my opinion, this is a decent start. Okay, so this, I disagree with basically everything that he just said right here. If you made these changes to Woven Mail and Sever, that would be plenty more. You don't have to do anything else to it. Okay, here's what I'm gonna say. For people that are, that are using the grapple melee. So what he's talking about is basically nerfing the amount of damage output that the super or that the class has, because you can use what is it called? Navigator. You can put a tangle, or a grapple tangle, up in the sky or somewhere, not necessarily up in the sky, but you can put it somewhere. Then you can constantly grapple to it and melee the boss. Shot, tractor cannon, 1-2 punch, then follow it up with a melee combo. That is what he's saying needs to be nerfed. My thoughts on that, though, is that very few players are actually doing that. Like this is something that like speedrunners and really, really high level players are doing. I don't think you necessarily need to do that. Like, I don't think that you need to nerf grapple, because if I'm just running around like playing like, I don't know, like a normal person, not some crazy try hard, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't want to lose half of my grenade for meleeing into an enemy when I'm using it from a grapple tangle. I want to be able to swing around the room, like, like I'm swinging on a rope, having fun, just, meleeing enemies here and there whenever I'm going. I do understand where he's coming from, because, obviously this is biased towards a high-end player's point of view. But I think that this is something that I would say the pros outweigh the cons. The pros of being able to have fun at moderate levels outweigh the strength that it has in super, super high level games. Like, I don't think this change needs to happen at all. I think that again, if you nerf Woven Mail and Sever, that's going to be plenty more than enough. But moving on to here. Oh, buff Suspend. Oh, I already agree with this one. I don't even know what it's going to say. Buff Suspend, at least double the duration on anything that's not a champion. I see why it needed to be nerfed for champs, but there is no reason it should have got hit that hard for red bars. Any other non-strand ability would likely have killed red bars. Anyways, yeah, this is something, especially like in Grandmaster content, like where the red bars have a lot of health. You can definitely feel that this, I mean, the suspend duration isn't long enough. Even with Thread of what is it, continuity, I think, right? That increases the duration. Like, it's not long enough. I think that's just unnerfing the suspend like duration to what it was pre-nerf, with the exception of champions, is going to be plenty more than enough. And I would say even with champions, like leaving champions up for maybe an additional second or two is still fine. Because I think at most, like, you can keep a champion suspended for 3 seconds, or is it 4 seconds? I can't remember, depending on your aspects and stuff. But yeah, I agree. Buff suspend, in low level content, it doesn't really matter, but in high level content, it definitely is very noticeable. Plus you got, a Buoyant Leap. Obviously I'm very biased. A Buoyant Leap Titans are, it's so fun to keep everything suspended. But yeah, hard buff Shatter damage. Yep, I already agree with this. Stasis needs a lot of help, and the CC alone isn't enough to justify running it. Not sure what CC is. It's not coming to me off the top of my head. If you know what CC is, tell me in the comments. Freezing and shattering something should... Crowd control. There we go. That's what it is. Crowd control. And crowd control isn't enough to justify running it. Freezing and shattering something should do way more damage. Otherwise, it's just a worse version of suspend. Yeah, so... I 100% agree with this. Like freezing enemies or shattering enemies doesn't do anything. And something that I really like that we've kind of had this season is these artifact mods. When you shatter enemies or when you break stasis crystal, it freezes, or it'll slow everything around it. That should become base kit, in my opinion. Like anything stasis, like when you shatter an enemy, it should shoot out those ice shards that that slow enemies around it. I also think that when you slow and shatter, like freeze an enemy, I think that the freeze duration should last a lot longer. Freeze should be very long time. Like if you want to freeze a champion for 15 seconds, that should be a thing. 15, 20 seconds. As long as you don't deal enough damage to shatter it, enemies should stay frozen for a very, very long time. Now, of course, we're talking about the shatter damage here. Shatter damage, it's already a lot, but it definitely doesn't feel like enough. Like the only stasis subclass I would say that's really worth running at any point in the game is Stasis Warlock with Osmiomancy, and that's a very specific build. Yes, I know you can make an argument for Stasis Titan and, in Onslaught and stuff like that, but I just think there's better options, and I think that Stasis does need a buff, and I think that buffing shatter damage would be a good start. We know we're getting frost armor in the future. Not sure exactly what that means or what it's going to do, but that could definitely help buff stasis. But yeah, I think shatter damage should be, basically, maybe if they don't increase the actual damage it does, at least give it that effect around it that we have with the artifact mod. Give it that slowing effect around it. I think that would be, this is something I definitely agree with. Rework stuff like surges, reserves, etc. Interesting. Anything that incentivizes heavy loadout swapping mid encounter is cringe. I'll agree with that. This sentence alone, I agree with this sentence alone 100%. Let's keep reading though. This is not about buffing or nerfing. It could go both ways. For example, I would rather the reserves value to be the standard that it's to be than it to be this current weird swap to it and take it off system. Or they could make you lose the extra ammo if you swap reserves. So what he's talking about here is right before boss fight, you put on a chest piece with triple reserve mods, then you take off that chest piece so that you can keep the ammo that you get from rallying the flags while you had those reserve mods on, and then switch off to it. I mean, here's my thought on this. If players want to do it, let players do it. Like if it makes players feel optimized or whatever, I don't do this. Like I think that it's honestly, it's a waste of time. Like I can beat any boss in the game without having to have that extra reserves. Even in contest mode raids, you can do it without the extra reserves. So I think that's, this is completely, I don't know. I'm not going to agree with it. I'm not going to really disagree with it. Like if players want a loadout swap, just let them do it. Let them do it. Let's keep reading here though. The whole ammo system needs a rework buff that would need its own post. LOL. Ultimately, I don't care what they do, and I don't think locked loadouts are fun. I would just love for the system to not make you feel like you are playing the game wrong if you aren't in your inventory 24/7. Again, I don't feel this way. I'm a hardcore player, and I don't feel like I'm in my inventory 24/7. This is one, I think, again, like if players want to be in their inventory, let it happen. Okay, there's nothing that is mandatory about, oh, you have to put on all of your reserve mods to get the maximum, amount of blah, blah, blah. Like, nerfing it, I mean, it wouldn't hurt anything, in my opinion. It wouldn't hurt me personally. It probably wouldn't hurt you. Like, you viewer watching this video right now, I'm talking to you. Would it hurt you? Probably not, right? Like, how often are you really, loadout swapping? Unless you're doing a speed run, which again, the speed running community, they do loadout swaps. They have literally the same loadout with one different mod on, over there, they can just switch to in game. So I don't really care one way or the other. But let's go ahead and move to the next one. Honorable mention: fix cenotaph stacking with multiple players. This is self-explanatory. It just makes no sense. It's both a boring playstyle and super problematic because it gives infinite heavy in-game activities. Again, this is one I don't see people doing this. Like, I literally don't think I've ever seen somebody double stacking cenotaph to have infinite heavy ammo. Yeah, like it can work that way, but if you're using the cenotaph, I don't know, like you're sacrificing so many better, like you're sacrificing sun bracers. If you're wearing cenotaph, like, I don't know, like, I don't think this is that big of a deal. Again, this is only affecting like maybe the super, super hardcore high-end player base. So if Bungie were to nerf this, it wouldn't make a big deal to the casual players or even most of the hardcore players. Like, it wouldn't make that big of a difference. Again, I'm kind of indifferent towards this. Again, for game health, that's fine. But, he says here it's a boring playstyle. Again, if somebody wants to play a boring playstyle, let them. One of my favorite playstyles is playing on Solar Warlock, the support build, full support, Ember of Benevolence, Healing Grenade, Lumina, heal clip weapon, placing my Rift down with Boots of the Assembler. That is a boring playstyle to some people, but that's fun to me. If you want to do that, that's fine. Okay, so those are the most generic and broad suggestions I have, while still being specific where needed. Obviously, there are plenty of single buffs and nerfs needed to plenty of exotic weapons and armors. Go check out our exotic recrafting series that we do every Monday if you want to know about some of these that I personally have my opinions on, and I might elaborate on those in the future. Don't steal my ideas, Salt. I'll be mad. But for now, those are more important. I think it's meant to say these are more important and urgent. As always, Bungie. Okay, yeah. So that's the end of it. Yeah. So again, Salt, he's doing the thing. Okay, he's doing the thing, and lots of people are gonna say no. But guys, let's be honest with ourselves. Most of these, like, not most, but a lot of these changes that he's talking about are, number one, they're hard buffs. Okay, this is a hard buff. Like I don't know anybody in Destiny 2 who would disagree with buffing weapons, right? This one right here, reverting the changes so that we have more ability energy. Like, why would you not agree with that? Like, that would, like, and we talked all about it. Like, why would you not agree with it? Like, most of these are buffs. But the nerfs that he does talk about, with the exception of this right here, and we'll talk about this in just a second, but most of the nerfs that he's talking about really are only going to affect the super high level players, like players that are optimally doing blah, blah, blah. And even those, like, where was it? Like the mods and stuff. Like, if somebody wants to be in their menu a lot, let them. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. If somebody wants to play in a boring play style for infinite heavy, that's fine. Let them do it. Like, I don't personally care about these, and I think that most players, again, don't care about these. I don't think Salt is the devil. I don't think Salt is. I think Salt is truly a passionate Destiny 2 player. What is the old quote in Fallout? They said in the commercial, everybody wants to fix the world. They just can't agree on how to do it. This is Salt's opinion on what needs to be fixed, stuff like that. Of course, I want to hear your thoughts on, what Salt says here. Oh, one more thing I did want to just cover. This, in my opinion, is the only thing that would really affect, like, the majority of players. And again, he's not saying just nerf damage resistance all around. Like, he's saying nerf damage resistance so that we don't have to make enemy attacks so powerful and have such a focus on it. I would agree with, I do kind of agree with this. Not completely, like, Whisper Chains, we talked about it. Whisper Chains needs to stay at 40%. For example, Void Overshield should, of course, be buffed. Resilience, I think, should stay at 30. I think that's fine. But yeah, remember, like, this is his opinions. I have my opinions on this. I've shared them. I agree with a lot of stuff he says here. There is some stuff I disagree with, and I talked about that. But of course, I want to hear your thoughts on all the stuff we just talked about here. What are your thoughts on Salt's? And again, please try to look at this analytically. Don't look at it as oh, Salt posted these things, so I'm automatically going to hate and not like it. Like, analyze it, think about it, talk about it in the comments. Of course, if you like today's video, it's been 45 minutes, can't believe that. If you like today's video, drop a like, helps the channel out a lot. Subscribe for more daily Destiny content. And guys, do me a favor, watch the videos you see here on the end screen, because for whatever reason, YouTube thinks you will like them. I will see y'all in the next one. Bye for now. Oh, I got that perfect.